It's no secret that Russia's war in Ukraine is not exactly going as planned. As the war has continued to progress for months on end now, Russia's supporters have continued to change the narrative. First, it was that Kyiv will fall in 3 days and the entirety of Ukraine would fall with it. Then they changed the goalpost and said that it was only a matter of weeks until Kyiv and the entire country would fall. Then, as the Russians withdrew from the north of Ukraine, they changed their mind entirely and decided that this was all some elaborate ruse and maneuver warfare at its finest. Then finally, it was Russia preparing for this massive build-up around the Donbass and from Crimea that would lead to one final push which would absolutely destroy the Ukrainian army. Ukraine was apparently out of men, equipment, ammunition and morale months ago, and it all should have been over. But of course, we know what none of that happened. We know none of that came true, and those people who pushed those narratives have been proven wrong time and time again. This map you can see behind me right here is exactly the state of the situation on the ground as of yesterday in Ukraine, whereas this map is how the situation looked 3 months ago back on May the 24th. There is virtually no discernible difference between what has actually happened over the war for the last 3 months, and it's my opinion that nothing's really going to happen in the near future either. This was supposed to be Russia's brilliant interpretation and version of Germany's blitzkrieg from World War II, but in the end, it's turned into Russia's version of the Western Front in the First World War. Now, as the war has started to really slow down and devolve into mostly stationary fights and artillery bouts and trench warfare, HIMARS has come out to play. Now, that stands for High Mobility Artillery Rocket System, and it comes courtesy of the United States. It's an incredibly versatile system, it's very easy to turn and move around, and it has long range, and it has proven frequently able to penetrate Russia's air defenses. It's also, of course, a very precise weapon, and it's led to loads of separate occasions of ammo depots across occupied Ukraine being destroyed by Ukrainian forces and severely harming Russia's offensive. Ukraine at this point in time has claimed 50 destroyed ammo depots as of about a month ago, and this is obviously making it very hard for Russia to continue to fight. Have they actually destroyed 50 depots? Well, maybe not, but HIMARS truly has proven itself to be ridiculously effective. Of course, more recently, we've seen Crimea start to be targeted by Ukrainian forces as well, either by missiles or from partisans themselves. It's not really entirely clear at this point. But over here, it's much of the same story. Ammo depots, airfields, military equipment, loads of Russian stuff, all of their valuable equipment is being destroyed, and they don't really seem to be able to stop it. It appears that Ukraine is basically trying to make Crimea unsafe, to force logistics to go around the peninsula to stop Crimea being used for Russia's invasion, and it looks like it's actually might be working. Of course, Russia is trying to downplay it all, as they always do, and this really shouldn't be surprising. Safety accidents seem to be happening nearly every single day, with Russia claiming that their soldiers are so incompetent that they just can't stop their ammo depots from spontaneously combusting. Now, at the same time as this happens, whenever these ammo depots go up in flames, Russia also swears that it will enact vengeance upon Ukraine for daring to cause these explosions in the first place, which they had already claimed were caused by their own incompetence. This is the exact same nonsense that we saw months ago now, when Russia decided to scuttle their cruiser in the middle of the sea after it had, of course, been basically sunk by Ukraine already. Russia is under serious pressure. The war is not going their way at all, and they have no easy or obvious way to win at this point. They have not really been able to make any advancements on the ground with their army, as you've seen from that map I just showed you of 3 months apart, almost 100 days. And it also seems that they're not able to counter Ukrainian attacks either through their line by penetrating air defenses or through partisan warfare. Russia is simply not capable of bringing this war to a decisive end. Now that leads us to where we are today and over this last week, and of course you would have heard this news that Alexander Dugin, Putin's brain, a political philosopher who is basically credited with shaping Putin's worldview, has been in the news a lot. He is a Russian ultranationalist. He's called for the invasion of Crimea back in 2014. He called for intervention in the Donbass back then as well. He called for the invasion of Georgia back in 2008, and he's also been calling for the invasion of Ukraine proper for years as well. He has basically called for this weird Russian strategy for the country to take over the world and bring the West down. Of course, he's also a massive supporter of the fifth column, of this idea of Russians living abroad in other countries being able to serve Russia's interests, and he's also a massive proponent and supporter of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and he's a very close Putin ally. I think most people then would consider him a legitimate target in this war between Ukraine and Russia, and for good reason, just in the same way that Zelensky was a legitimate target of the Russian forces earlier on in the war, and Putin would of course be a legitimate target of Ukraine at any point as well. Now the news is that a car bomb went off in Moscow supposedly targeting this man, but it killed his daughter instead. Now, at first, it was immediately assumed that she was simply collateral damage, that he was the target, but now things really don't seem so clear. His daughter is pretty much a carbon copy of himself. She's very similar. She is a Russian nationalist journalist. She's also been a massive supporter of the war in Ukraine. She has personally visited Mariupol and Azovstal after Russia took it. She's written propaganda pieces about the massacre at Bucha, about Azov, and loads of different things like that. So in the few days between this video going out and this news coming out that she's been murdered or assassinated, there's this new idea going around that actually maybe she was the legitimate target in the first place. Now, one thing that a lot of different people are talking about here is who exactly is responsible for this assassination, and in my mind there are four basic possibilities. The first is that this might have been some kind of false flag attack by Russia itself. The second is that this is Ukrainian Special Operations Forces or spies, something in that range. The third is the same idea, but coming from NATO or the United States or some other Western force. And the fourth is that this was Russian partisans who oppose Putin, his regime, and this war. Of course, Russia are blaming Ukraine directly, and of course, Ukraine are denying any kind of relation to this. They say that this was the National Resistance Army, which is being dubbed the Russian IRA. They're claiming that they did it. Russia, on the other hand, have put out a claim that they tracked the person who planted the bomb. They found out that they came into Russia from Ukraine in a car about a month ago, and they stayed in the same building as this woman for about a month before planting this bomb and escaping to Estonia. Now, the simple truth here, and if anyone disagrees with me on this, I have to call you irrational, I'm afraid, because having a concrete opinion on who is actually responsible and who actually carried out this attack is frankly silly, because you and I, the normal average people who get our information just from news articles and sources like myself online, we just don't know what happened. It also just so happens that it really isn't important who did this either. The chance of this being a false flag attack by Russia is, in my opinion, very slim. There are rumors like this article behind me that you can see that suggest that Alexander and his daughter too were targeted by Russia itself because they stole money specifically from funds that were supposed to support Marine Le Pen's election campaign in France. But frankly, they're oligarchs, they steal money from Russia. Every oligarch steals money from the state, and I think it's very unlikely that this was actually a false flag attack. That leaves the other three options: that this was a direct action from Ukraine itself, direct action from NATO or the United States or some other Western operative, or this was from the National Resistance Army, the Russian IRA, as I just said. And here it doesn't really matter who's at fault because they all have the same motive and they all have the same goals. And if it was any one of these organizations, they likely had support from others as well. Now, the really important thing about this story, and the reason we're actually talking about this today, is because this will have results on the war and on relations and on financial markets all over the world. The immediate result of this is that Russia will claim to retaliate, but quite frankly, they're already in a near total war with Ukraine. They're already killing soldiers and civilians every single day. So what can Russia really do that it hasn't already tried at this point? The front line is in total stalemate, and it has been for months, as I've already shown you with these legitimate maps of how the war is going. Russia doesn't have any kind of HIMARS equivalent. It doesn't have any air power that it can use safely and securely. And it doesn't have any sea power that it can use under those same circumstances either. It's already proven that it literally can't win this war on the ground, or it would have done so already. The one real potential for an escalation in this sense is that maybe Russia tries to start its own assassination programs of its own, which is a possible, but frankly, Ukraine is so on edge that I think it's very unlikely that this would actually be successful. Back over in Moscow, where this car bombing took place, life was pretty much just going on as normal. Most Russians were just pretending that the war isn't real and doesn't really affect them, and it was far enough away from Ukraine that they could do that. In Ukraine, it's the polar opposite. Maybe Russia could target politicians or supporters of Ukraine from other countries that are less on edge in Europe and NATO, but that would be absolutely playing with fire, and Russia knows this in its entirety. Military support from the West is already causing Russia's failings to a large degree, and this would just cause further escalation in this mini arms race. What we do know for sure is that this is a brilliant and perfect example of tensions between East and West getting worse. This is an example of how the war will develop in the future, of how it will get more brutal and how it will not start to wane. As a result of this, the financial impacts of the war will continue to grow worse and worse for both sides as well. There does seem to be this tendency, and I've noticed it on YouTube in particular, for people to focus on either Russia's problems or Europe's problems and acts like one side is entirely fine while the other side is absolutely screwed. The reality is here, though, that the financial impacts of this war are destroying both Europe's and Russia's economy right as we speak. Russia has pretty much no advanced industry to speak of. It has a massive shortage of microchip imports, which will cause a dark age for its economy in the long term. They are still exporting oil and gas at this point, but every year that this war continues, the West and Europe's in particular reliance on Russian gas and energy will reduce, and Russia will have no industry to fall back on. Their GDP is almost entirely propped up by their oil and gas industry and almost nothing else. Europe, on the other hand, has seen energy prices explode with no sign of them going down anytime soon. Now, this will have two very basic but very major consequences. Normal people will spend less money on discretionary items because they have to spend 4 or 5 times as much every month on the gas to heat their homes, on the electricity to keep their lights on, and on fuel for their cars. The second massive impact is on businesses themselves and manufacturing in particular, as it's a very energy intensive process, and these companies, these businesses will lose their profitability. The euro just hit a brand new 20-year low. It is currently, as I make this video, worth less than $1. It's even worse than parity. Both of these problems together will lead to a massive recession in Europe at the exact same time as Russia enters its own massive recession. The important message to take from this video is that all the problems from this war are not over at all. In fact, they're getting worse by the day, and these problems will not end anytime soon because the war isn't going to end anytime soon either. The only way forward I really see for the markets in the long term is down because there's just too much working against them, and there doesn't seem to be much else of a possibility of any bullishness here. If you enjoyed this video, then make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to bless the YouTube algorithm. It really does help. If you want to join our exclusive community, then check out our Patreon. You get access to our Discord server and extra content like access to my portfolio and buy and sell alerts for all my own investments. Thank you all for watching. Stay stoic. Until next time.